didn't think about my sister showing up late with a garment bag until my mom kept steering me away from the bridal room. Why was everyone acting like I'd gotten dressed?
The morning of my wedding started so quietly that I remember thinking nothing could possibly go wrong. Rain tapped softly against the hotel windows while my bridesmaids curled their hair beside me. And downstairs, guests were already filling the ballroom for the ceremony. My younger sister Rachel showed up almost an hour late, carrying a garment bag I didn't recognize, and my mom immediately pulled her into the hallway before I could even say hi. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rachel had always been dramatic, and my mom had always treated her like she needed extra attention. But a few minutes later, one of my bridesmaids looked at me strangely and asked, "Wait, I thought your sister said she wasn't wearing white." Then I went downstairs to check on my dress, and the hanger inside the bridal room was empty. I actually just stood there for a second, staring at the empty space, trying to convince myself I was looking in the wrong place. The room smelled faintly like steamed fabric and perfume, and my dress bag was still unzipped on the couch beside the mirror. But the gown itself was gone. A wedding coordinator brushed past me, carrying folded table cards, and smiled too quickly when she saw my face. "Probably just being pressed downstairs," she said, before I could ask anything. Then she kept walking. That explanation should have made sense, except my dress had already been steamed the night before. I knew because my dad had stood in this exact room with me while I checked every tiny detail for the 100th time. He'd laughed and told me I was the only person he knew who treated a wedding checklist like a military operation. I remember touching the lace sleeve before zipping the garment bag closed myself, so no one should have needed to move it. I pulled out my phone to text my mom, but before I could type anything, she appeared in the doorway like she'd been watching for me. Her lipstick was slightly smudged, and she looked oddly tense for someone who'd spent the whole morning insisting everyone stay calm. "There you are," she said quickly. "People are looking for you upstairs." "My dress is missing." Her eyes flicked toward the empty hanger for less than a second. Then she smiled. Not warmly, more like she was trying to smooth over a problem before it became inconvenient. "Lena, don't start spiraling today," she said. "Everything is handled." Handled. Something about that word bothered me immediately. Before I could press her further, Rachel hurried across the hallway behind her, carrying the same white garment bag I'd seen earlier. She froze the second she noticed me standing there, and for the first time all morning, my sister wouldn't look me in the eye. By the time I went back upstairs, the bridal suite somehow felt different, even though nothing had visibly changed. The makeup artists were still packing brushes onto the counter. My bridesmaids were still laughing quietly near the window. Music from the ballroom drifted faintly through the ceiling vents. But underneath all of it, there was this strange pressure building in my chest that I couldn't explain yet. I sat down in front of the mirror while my maid of honor, Cassie, adjusted the pins in my hair. She hesitated for a second before speaking. "So, your mom really didn't tell you?" I looked up at her reflection immediately. "Tell me what?" Cassie's expression shifted fast, like she regretted opening her mouth at all. "Nothing. Forget it." That only made me more alert. Cassie wasn't dramatic. She was the kind of person who avoided conflict so aggressively, she apologized when other people stepped on her shoes. If even she looked uncomfortable, something was wrong. Outside the suite, I could hear my mother's voice moving through the hallway, sharp and controlled as she directed vendors around. Every few minutes, she appeared in the doorway to check on me, but each time it felt less like concern and more like supervision. "Stay up here until we're ready," she said at one point. "There's too much movement downstairs." I frowned. Why would there be too much movement? "Because weddings are chaotic, Lena." Her smile tightened. Don't make everything harder today. That landed strangely. I hadn't complained. I hadn't even raised my voice. A few minutes later, one of the bridesmaids returned from the lobby carrying coffees. She stopped mid-step when she saw me. "Oh," she said quietly, "you're still wearing your robe." I stared at her. Why wouldn't I be? She opened her mouth, then closed it again. And suddenly I realized people downstairs thought I was already dressed.
If nobody had seen me dressed yet, why were people downstairs acting like the bride was already ready for the ceremony?
A few minutes later, the wedding coordinator knocked softly on the suite door and stepped inside, holding a clipboard against her chest. She looked nervous now in a way she hadn't earlier. Not rushed, not busy, nervous. "We're about 10 minutes out," she said carefully. "We just need to confirm the order for the entrances." I glanced up from the chair. "What order?" Her eyes flicked toward my mother so quickly I almost missed it. "The processional order," she said. "There was some confusion about which bride enters first." The room went completely still. I actually thought I'd misheard her at first. "Which what?" Before the coordinator could answer, my mother stepped forward smoothly. "She means Rachel's entrance into the seating area," she interrupted. "Honestly, everyone's exhausted today." But the coordinator's face had already changed. She looked like someone who realized too late that she'd said something she wasn't supposed to. I stood up slowly. "Why would Rachel have an entrance?" "Lena," my mom said quietly, warning already creeping into her voice. "Not now." That phrase again. Not now. As if there was a better time for whatever this was. Cassie suddenly busied herself with gathering makeup brushes off the table, avoiding eye contact entirely. One of the bridesmaids pretended to answer a text message she clearly hadn't received. The silence in the room felt rehearsed, like everybody knew one piece of information I didn't. Then I remembered something Rachel had posted online 2 weeks earlier after her engagement officially ended. Some people get their happy ending handed to them. Others get told to clap while it happens to someone else. At the time, I'd assumed she was venting about her breakup. My mother certainly had. She spent days talking about how fragile Rachel was lately and how everyone needed to be careful around her. Now, standing in that room, I realized my mother hadn't been managing Rachel's emotions. She'd been planning around them. And downstairs, through the muffled sound of guests talking, I heard someone say clearly, "Why are there 2 women in white?" For a second, nobody in the room moved. Then I walked past my mother and straight into the hallway before anyone could stop me. I could hear heels clicking against marble downstairs, chairs scraping softly across the ballroom floor, the string quartet awkwardly restarting the same piece of music for what sounded like the 3rd time. The whole hotel suddenly felt tense in a quiet, controlled way, like people were trying very hard not to stare at something inappropriate happening in public. My mother caught up to me near the staircase. "Lena," she said sharply under her breath, "do not make a scene." I turned toward her. "What is Rachel wearing?" She just needed a confidence boost today. I actually blinked at her because the answer made no sense. A confidence boost? "She's been through a humiliating breakup," my mother said, lowering her voice as guests nearby pretended not to listen. "You know how sensitive she is." "And that has what to do with my dress?" My mother exhaled like I was being difficult on purpose. "You still get your wedding. Why does everything always have to belong only to you?" That sentence hit harder than yelling would have, because she sounded sincere, like she truly believed I was selfish for being upset. We reached the ballroom entrance before I could answer. The doors stood slightly open, and through the gap, I finally saw Rachel clearly. She was standing near the aisle, smiling nervously at guests while adjusting the lace sleeve on her gown. My gown. The satin fit tighter around the waist than it had on me. The hem had been shortened slightly, just enough that it brushed perfectly against her heels now. Someone had altered it carefully, professionally. This hadn't happened impulsively that morning. It had been planned. A wave of whispers moved across the ballroom as people noticed me standing there in my robe, while Rachel wore the dress everyone assumed belonged to the bride. My groom's family looked confused, embarrassed. A few guests had already taken out their phones before lowering them awkwardly again. And near the front row, my father slowly stood up from his seat. He looked directly at Rachel first, then at my mother. And in a voice so calm, the entire room instantly went silent, he asked, "Why is she wearing that dress?" Nobody answered him immediately. The ballroom had gone so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the hotel lights overhead. Rachel's hands tightened around the bouquet she was holding, and my mother folded her arms like she was already preparing for an argument she believed she could win. My father looked at Rachel again, slower this time. "Isn't that the dress we bought for Lena?" I still couldn't speak. My throat felt tight in that awful way where emotion doesn't even come out properly anymore. Then my mother smiled, calmly, almost proudly. She deserved it more. Several guests exchanged stunned looks. One of my husband's aunts actually whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. But my father didn't raise his voice. If anything, he became even calmer, which somehow made the room more uncomfortable. He stepped into the aisle and looked toward the officiant. "Stop the ceremony." The officiant immediately lowered his hands and stepped back. The musicians stopped playing mid-note. Across the room, Rachel's expression started breaking apart into panic. "Dad," she began. "No," he said firmly. "We are not doing this." My mother let out a sharp breath. "Thomas, don't embarrass Rachel in front of everyone." He turned toward her slowly. "Embarrass Rachel?" he repeated. "You stole Lena's wedding dress." My mother rolled her eyes like he was exaggerating. "Oh, please. Rachel needed this today." And that was the moment I realized this wasn't impulsive to her at all. She genuinely thought this was reasonable. My father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. 2 weeks ago, he said, looking directly at me now. "I noticed charges from a tailor I didn't recognize." Rachel's face went pale immediately. "I asked your mother about it," he continued. "She told me Rachel was having your dress adjusted because she wanted to feel included in the wedding." A ripple of disbelief spread through the guests. My father's jaw tightened. "I told her absolutely not." My mother scoffed. "And I told you Lena could handle it." That sentence landed like a physical impact, because it explained everything. Not just the dress, not just the wedding. Years of it. Every birthday where Rachel got the bigger celebration because she was having a hard time. Every family dinner where I was expected to apologize first because I was more mature. Every moment where keeping Rachel comfortable mattered more than treating me fairly. My father looked at Rachel again. "Take the dress off." Rachel immediately burst into tears. "Dad, please, everybody's staring at me." "They should be," he said. "You knew exactly what you were doing." My mother stepped protectively beside her. She just wanted one day where she didn't feel less important than Lena. I finally found my voice, quietly. "On my wedding day?" Neither of them answered me. That silence hurt more than the dress itself. Around the ballroom, guests had stopped pretending not to judge. My husband's mother looked furious. One of Rachel's friends quietly slipped out a side exit. Even the photographer had lowered her camera, clearly unsure whether she should still be working. Rachel suddenly looked much younger standing there crying in my altered gown, while my mother defended her like she was a child who'd broken a vase instead of humiliating someone publicly.
Eventually, Rachel ran from the ballroom in tears. My mother followed after her, but not before turning back toward my father. "You're choosing Lena over your own family," she snapped. And my father answered, "Lena is my family." The doors slammed behind them. For the first time all morning, nobody moved. It felt like the entire room needed a second to process what had just happened. Then my father walked over to me. His expression had softened completely now, and suddenly he looked older than he had that morning. Tired, mostly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stopped this behavior years ago." About an hour later, the ceremony started again. The bridal boutique owner, after hearing what happened from one of the coordinators, personally drove over with a backup gown from her store. It wasn't as elaborate as the original dress. Simpler fabric, smaller train, no custom sleeves. But honestly, by then, none of that mattered anymore. Because for the first time in my life, someone had finally said out loud that what my mother and sister were doing to me wasn't normal. When the ceremony resumed, 2 seats in the front row stayed empty. And as my father walked me down the aisle, he squeezed my hand once and whispered, "You never should have had to earn basic respect from your own family." That was the moment I nearly cried. Not because of the dress, because someone had finally noticed.
Sometimes, the people who cross the biggest boundaries aren't hiding it at all. Everyone around them just gets so used to excusing it that nobody questions it anymore.